Hi everybody. Welcome to an introduction to program evaluation. There are many parts of what we need to know about program evaluation. We're not going to cover all of them in this overview lecture. You've got a great set of resources to connect with in terms of talking you through the specifics. So I'm not reproducing the details of program evaluation. And what you'll see here are the kinds of concepts I want you to pull from this week's readings and activities. The ones in red are the ones I'm going to lecture about so that you have some rootedness to some of the bigger picture issues, creating in a way the scaffolding on which the details are going to hang and the details you're going to get from your readings. So the items in red are the ones that I'm going to focus on, such as why do we do program evaluation? That's where we're going to start today. And then you're advised to really dig into the program evaluation methods and designs. I'm going to do a little bit of an overview around logic models, theories of change, and then the elements you're going to pull from your readings. I'm also going to speak to credibility issues in designing evaluations that have both internal credibility, meaning internal to the organization, so the organization's own staff, board, service users, community members who are connected. That's the internal credibility issues, and external are those external bodies such as current funders, future funders, and those that would be looking perhaps to replicate or to review your program's gains. You'll also be connecting some to qualitative research and design and some consideration around when to use interviews and focus groups. I want you to pull that from the work you're reading. And developing strong interview and focus group questions and engagement during an interview. And we really want you to go into interviews and focus groups with less of sort of this objective observer and instead really do what you can to understand the nature of the experiences. So you'll be using yourself more, you'll be using more of an inquiry that is aiming to understand as opposed to aiming to elicit sort of sets of perspectives. We'll also be digging into, in your review of the content, analyzing qualitative data in your readings. Next week we go into the quantitative data, and we're going to talk you through that content a bit more explicitly in the lectures. And then we'll wrap, and then covering this content in this lecture, advanced issues in program evaluation and focusing on culturally responsive program evaluation and what that looks like. There is a chapter in your text on this, but I'm adding some to that content. So to begin, why do we do evaluations? Traditional ones are really about showing that we're meeting our goals. Programs are designed to achieve specific outcomes, and we want to know if we've reached those. We also want to connect to funder satisfaction. Most of our activities in health, human services, the types of things that social workers do are focused on, have been grant funded in some kind of way. Sometimes they're also funded by the organization itself and from its donors. And we really want those people who contribute to be assured, and this is a quote you'll see a little bit later, that this is a worthwhile and responsible investment of their resources. And then we also want to use it for self-improvement of our own program. And so one of the cycles we use is action. So we do the intervention, we reflect, we revise, and we continue that cycle. And that cycle is referred to in popular education circles as praxis, so that we have this continual quality improvement. And we'll talk some about that at the end of the course around how to build those types of systems. I also want to draw your attention to one of the texts that I love, the Finn and Jacobson text that's used in the Plicko concentration. And they bring to light additional options in evaluation. And this includes creating memories of practice, a way to document our innovations, our partnerships, our achievements, a way to empower communities and participants. So the process of doing the evaluation itself becomes a pathway to building community power. Obviously, we hope that our outcomes are going to build the community's power, but also the process. So both pieces are key opportunities for empowerment. Sometimes we also want to use evaluation to highlight injustice, so inequities. And at the very minimum in an evaluation, you can say, our graduates of our program, for example, face huge challenges because of the discrimination that employers hold against hiring, for example, foster care graduates or folks who are homeless or folks who are coming out of the justice system. And so what you want to do in that kind of work is increase your focus, articulate it, and bring to light the larger injustices that often can impede your program being successful. Another piece is around creating springboards for action. So the very practice of pulling people together, reflecting together, building insights together, that is a program evaluation, really does say, and where should we go next? What do we need next? What does the community want next? And you end up using those as springboards for new initiatives. And finally, evaluation can also be a real wonderful celebration. So make sure in the process of doing evaluations that you build time to add elements that affirm contributions and effort and outcomes, both for the staff and also for service users. So when I center back to sort of the real core of an evaluation, bracketing for now the Finna-Jacobson contributions, the real core piece is, and I'll draw your attention in the red, which is about, we know, sorry, let me take a step back. The core of the work is to say, we promised this, here's what we achieved. So it's really tying back to the proposal development phase of the work. And most of us have in your activities in social work-based organizations, you will have had a grant proposal created or some type of proposal that said, here's what we need. And I wanted to ground you back with a really simple and effective proposal development model that came from Homewood, which is back in Toronto where I came from. And they have a 4-part proposal development process that begins with defining the condition you want to change. So a reviewer would look at your proposal and say, I understand what the target condition is, and I agree that something should be done. The second part is, when you describe what your proposed change is, that you answer the question, here's what I want to change in order to do this. And so the evocation you're aiming for by a reviewer is, I understand the proposed changes for participants. And then also the ethical imperative saying, I agree changes are sensible and worthwhile. And so it's not just, I see something needs to be done, but I agree that what you're proposing makes sense. And you then describe your intervention, and that needs to be really clear, and you need to evoke, again, a reviewer's sense of, I understand what they intend to do. And here's where the intervention connects to the theory of change. I'm going to shift into logic models in just a second to just with an overview to understand how this connects to the real pragmatics of how a program is put together. And you're going to be wanting to evoke a sense of, I believe that what you're suggesting, what you're planning on doing, will achieve the desired outcome. And that the evaluation that we're focusing on now today, so not the proposal, but actually now evaluating it once it's been done, here's how we achieved our promised outcomes, here's how we did not, and here's how we could address this in the future. So you want to get to a place at the end that says, here's what we achieved. So it's about tying back to what you promised to some degree, which is usually where your logic model kicks in. And also that you are articulating your connection back to those promises, where we met them, where we did not, and if we were given the chance to continue this program, here's how we would improve. The final piece around a proposal development, this Homewood framework, is that at the beginning of a proposal, when you craft it, you should also be including a proposal for an evaluation. So what you want to evoke is that the evaluation will show if the goals and objectives were met and that the proposal is a responsible investment of funds. So I love this one-pager from Homewood that talks you through what a proposal looks like and how a reader of it, and it's usually a grant reviewer of it, is inspired to believe these things about your proposal. And that's where it ties into the program evaluation. One, that you're documenting whether you've achieved the desired outcome, and to identify and affirm for the reviewer that you met the goals that you'd promised. So I want to now take a step into looking at logic models, and there's what we call, one of our community students, Allie Young, crafted this for us a number of years ago, and what she framed was really, if you start at one with the roots, so it's really about aiming to demystify a logic model, and it's really about, think about how a tree grows and what it does. And the tree from roots to leaves is the organization. So start at one. So the roots are really about how the tree gathers insights, gathers the nutrients that it needs. I shouldn't say insights. How it pulls in what it needs. So the roots are what we call the resources or the inputs. The trunk are the activities. So this is where, if you know a tree's biology, it's where nutrients go up. It's also where wastes come down. Think of it, you could also imagine this with a body with veins and arteries, but it's where the activity really happens that creates the branches, which is what it does, how it morphs those inputs into activities, what the staff do, what volunteers do. And then the leaves are sort of the blossoming of the results. So it's really about the outcomes, what gets achieved for clients. So it's not that they went to a workshop, it's that they learned enough to take care of their children better, for example. So the leaves are the outcomes. Now let's not forget shade, beauty, and oxygen as outcomes of a tree, but those are really referred to as impacts. So what's the extra value added? Not just the leaves and what happens at an individual level, but what's the overall benefit that influences the broader environment? Trees create shade for other things to flourish underneath it. They also create beauty, and they also create oxygen, which has a much wider community impact than just the leaves that are tied to the benefits for the individuals going through the service. So I want you to hang on to this idea. The tree will probably make things a little bit easier. There are details in the Kellogg logic model. We didn't have you read that for this course. I'm just going to summarize it here. If you grab the tree model, that's probably all you need to know at this point in time. A logic model really does help help position an intervention so it's understood for being likely to produce specific results. You often get asked in grant writing to create a logic model of your program. And so it's a systematic and visual way to document the relationships between the resources, what you get by way of funding, how you turn that into staffing and services and other resources, and how that then creates benefits for individuals, and then how it has a hope for wider long-term impact. And so that's if you look in the middle of the page there, inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, impacts. That's sort of the pathway for a logic model. So the input is the money. It might be volunteer time as well. The activities are really what your staff and volunteers do. They deliver workshops, they create home visiting programs, they will design, they'll provide case management to 40 people, that kind of thing. What will they do with those inputs? The outputs then are sort of client-centered outputs. We will have 40 people trained in X. We will have 30 people who will get case management services. We will have 10 kids benefit from an intensive tutoring program every week, for example. The outcomes are what are the benefits, and this is an important piece that many staff miss. They talk about success by way of, well, we had 400 people come and go through a workshop. Well, did it benefit their lives? Did it create any kind of sustaining knowledge, behavior change, benefit to their lives that helped them move out of poverty, that helped them get through school, that helped them live a healthier life? So it's about transitioning from outputs to outcomes that's really important. And then impacts are that long-term benefit, that it's usually about stretching from an individual benefit to a larger benefit. And that larger benefit is usually talked up by way of a community impact. So if you deliver enough services over a period of time, or you involve the community enough in building their own answers to something like not having living wage jobs, and if you can do economic development with that group of people, they in turn can have sustaining employment for the next 20 years. And that is in of itself a huge impact. It also might have a ripple effect on helping their kids get through school better. It might have an impact on mental health and reducing demands on other services and helping people lead happier, more stress reducing lives. And so think about that long-term impacts. And the final point at the bottom of this page says that these long-term impacts usually take an investment of 7 to 10 years to create. So while we usually promise or anticipate that impacts will be achieved, we don't usually know that until farther down the road. So here's the visual of what the logic model typically looks like. And those, another way of saying it are those sentences above. It's the if-then path. If we do this, then this will happen. If we do this, then this will happen. And if we do this, if we've accomplished this, then the participants will benefit. For example, what I did want to draw your attention to are those gold arrows. And this is where people are often get a logic model, but they don't really understand the theory of change part of it. So a theory of change really works in the spaces between outputs and outcomes and impacts. So the first arrow and the second arrow. And our theories of change are really about what do you think is going to, what do you think is reasonable to, sorry, I apologize. Let me start this again. The gold arrows highlight your thinking that makes you believe that if we deliver all this education, then people will lead healthier lives. What is it that explains the transition from outputs to outcomes? And additionally, what are the theories of change? What is the reason that you believe that those outcomes will lead to those impacts? And part of, in doing a really good logic model, part of that is saying out loud, if we do this community education, then we believe as an organization, that people will lead healthier lives. And the theory of change connected there is one about sort of efficacy and the importance of knowledge and awareness leading to improved action. And so you would be drawing on some of those theories like positive youth development or adult education, that as people gain insights, then they will be able to make better choices. It's something about as well an empowerment model, is that information leads to certain action. On the other side, if you say, well, I believe that if we give people opportunities to participate in I don't know, their child's education, then that will create a positive benefit for the whole community. That is, as parents become individually empowered, then they will have a community benefit. So some of the theories that connect there are things like civic engagement, that people that are engaged start to build leadership skills and become a resource for their community. Another example is if people gather, as individuals gather knowledge, that it can have a transformative potential to lead to expressions of power and influence in different ways. So efficacy and empowerment and transformative learning could have that ripple effect, could lead you to believe that there's this ripple effect into the community. So that's by way of an example to say, here's how theories of change intersect with the logic model. So you wouldn't actually write your theories of change into the logic model, but you would have it as a subsequent section, for example, in a proposal. There are some additional definitions there for outputs, outcomes, and impacts. Those are some of those key pieces. I'm not going to read them. You can print those and read them on your own. And I am going to spend a minute speaking about a logic model. This is a real logic model that was submitted as part of a grant I was connected with. And it's a logic model for Upstream Public Health, which is a local organization that was at the lead of the water fluoridation battle in Portland a few years ago. We actually had a referendum and the referendum failed, so ultimately this wasn't successful. But if you take a look at this, you've got their inputs over on the left: time, money, staffing, volunteers, community stakeholders. And then you have the activities, what they're going to do. They're going to have monthly coalition meetings. They were going to work with political strategists. They were going to do grassroots organizing, develop key messaging, purchase media. So those were all the things we were going to do, the activities. Then the outputs, what was going to be manifest with those resources. And they were going to build a network of community leaders. So they're going to build so the coalition was going to create people that was going to join together advocates. They also were going to build support from council. Their media coverage was going to get viewed, so they were going to get coverage of their issue, and they were going to show to the city council that they had the ability to leverage support. But those don't really they say these things, but they don't, that's not a real change in people's lives. So what, by way of outcomes, what they asserted was that they were actually going to increase public support for fluoridation. They were going to get lots of organizations to endorse it. They were going to increasingly influence the way the issue got discussed. So they were going to review newspaper ads or newspaper coverage of this issue, TV coverage, radio coverage, that was going to palpably see support for fluoridation. And they were going to have counselors demonstrate their support. Then you obviously are hoping long term that fluoridation is going to get passed. I think they stopped short of promising this in the grant they were seeking, but they said actual outcomes. They were going to increase public support for fluoridation. They were going to have organizations endorse. That actually shows up as an outcome as well. And they were going to have positive media hits, and negative media was going to shrink, and you were going to have publicly endorsing counselors say, we're going to oppose this, we're going to support fluoridation. So that's a logic model in more of a campaigning kind of orientation than a service orientation. I'm going to go back for a sec. So that's what I wanted to do as you read program evaluation content. I wanted to tie it to program plans because we're wanting to assess whether we've achieved, and this is important, whether we've achieved the outputs. That's really easy to document. You know, how many people came to your events, how many people got served by your organization, how many hours of service did they get, how many pedometers did you distribute, how many take-home backpacks of food did you give out at the schools. Those are outputs. That's pretty easy to track, but that is an evaluation activity to understand that, track it, and document. Then you want to say, did we reach our outcomes, and did we reach our impacts? And so what you really want to do is to say, and I'm actually going to go back because I realized that the headings for some of these, the last column actually says actual measurable outcomes as opposed to impacts. So I apologize for using this. So I'm going to go back to our tree model and say what you're really aiming to track are the activities, easy to do. Sorry, not the activities. The outputs. How many people did you engage with? How many people were really served in what kind of specific ways? So you're going to be tracking 3, 4, and 5 in this model. You're going to be in a program evaluation. So what you're going to want to be doing, and where your biggest effort comes from, is for identifying the outcomes. How have people's lives been improved, been changed in ways that are, or just how much, in ways that are a reflection of what you provided for them. And then number 5, can you capture in an evaluation what kinds of long-term impacts have been made, have been imprinted on the community in which you're based, or on the long-term lives of those who've been involved with your services. So your evaluation activity is 3, 4, and 5. Branches, leaves, and shade, right? That overall benefit. So I think that helps. What we're now going to transition to for the last part of this presentation is about culturally responsive program evaluation. So you've got the Westet text, there's a chapter in it, as well as the Cowes article. But what I'm also going to, I'm going to add to those synthesis of the literature a little bit about Indigenous frameworks. There is a lot written around Indigenous frameworks in program evaluation. Indigenous referring to Native American, Indigenous peoples around the world have been working really hard to say this is what program evaluation and also research mean to us. And we'll also do a deeper dive here into the meaning of culture. When we talk about culturally responsive, I want to operationalize culture for you. So I did a lit review for another project, and so I just want to summarize and share that with you. So what is a culturally responsive evaluation? Two big pieces. It fully accounts for culture in the program. So types of things that we want to look at are the ways people's real life experiences and identities are recognized and brought into the evaluation. It's also about hearing a diversity of voices and perspectives. It's about examining often neglected variables in standard evaluations. And it's also about customizing standardized tools that have often been normed, studied in dominant culture environments. And so what we want to do is bring a cultural appreciation into the foreground and customize some of those tools. You actually have a major project in this course. Your final paper is about customizing a evidence-based practice. Culture also influences what types of questions are asked and not asked in an evaluation study. It also affects your approach to evaluation. Culturally responsive is going to veer more towards qualitative than quantitative data collection and analysis. And so you'd be looking for more of a storied, interpretive understanding of people's experiences. It'll also show up in your analysis around what's highlighted and what's not highlighted. What data is collected and what's overlooked. Whose and what interpretation is valued or not valued. And what conclusions go into the report and what conclusions stay out of the report. And how are the results presented and disseminated. All of those have cultural bias to them. Dominant culture tends to be quantitative, tends to be really logical in the logic model. It tends to follow, we're going to study, this is what we promised we deliver, we're going to assess whether we reach that or not. And that's going to be the central piece. There might be a little bit on the side that we didn't expect that we capture and somehow have shown up, but you're not going to go looking for those variations in a more of a mainstream approach to evaluation research. We're also going to be valuing the evaluator's interpretation of the findings of what happened and not looking for, in a more exploratory way, what those involved and what communities themselves say was important about what was achieved. And again, in the conclusions and the writing of it and dissemination of it, it's going to be more mainstream. It's going to be tying back to that logic model really, really explicitly and not making space for much of anything else. In the culturally responsive, there's really an inverting of those priorities, and you'll have it be more exploratory. You'll be looking for meaning making by participants, by community members. You'll be exploring more storied understandings. You'll be looking at experiences on the margins more so than experiences in the mainstream of what people experienced. So that's a bit of an overview of culturally responsive evaluations. I'll talk a little bit about Indigenous evaluations as well. and really clear focus around the process principles, supporting multiple ways of knowing. So tapping into, again, the narrative, stories, poems, artwork. We're also going to tap into not just what the results were on a pre and post survey, but also what people's hunches are. What are people's sense of what happened? What are people's wonderings about what happened, as opposed to that documented pre and post? It's also about ensuring that the work itself is owned by the community, by Native Americans in this context. And we usually use evaluation in the community as a way for the community to self-define. And overall, it's about building community power and self-determination, as opposed to holding the community accountable for a grant that it got and proving that it did what it promised. Now, usually Native communities have to do that anyways, but that's a violation of what's typically recognized as their Indigenous framework. We really want to center community power and self-determination through the process and the product of a evaluation study. So some of the additional pieces that we'll find in the Indigenous literature are about focusing on community-defined understandings of the value of the program, infused with traditional values and cultural expressions. We'll want to respect in the process self-determination and sovereignty. I'm doing a research study, and one of the participating communities is a tribal community in Umatilla, and they actually we have an agreement with them that they own the research, they own the right to review and revise the reports as they see fit. So we're respecting Indigenous sovereignty in this case, and their ownership is what mattered. They would not partner with us unless they had it. So we also emphasize those values and retain flexibility. Community owns the process. It fits with community needs and circumstances. The Umatilla tribe intends to use the report for their own local advocacy work, for their own presentations it's around chronic absenteeism, to the school district and to local city council about what their community needs and how service providers should respond. And finally, we want to make sure in an Indigenous approach to this work that there are learnings for broader society about how the community makes sense of this work. So this is an important contribution to society overall, even though it looks like it's of the Indigenous community for the community, but there are certainly larger impacts, both for mainstream U.S. society, and also for their own communities. So my final piece I'm going to work with you on is trying to operationalize culture, just so you get a better sense of it. And I found a model referred to as the iceberg model of culture. And if you know, in an iceberg, the visible part of an iceberg is about 10% of the total size of the iceberg. And so it's the surface culture and deep culture that I want to draw your attention to. Most people know, and so I'm wanting to stretch students' understanding from the easily observable surface to the deep culture. And so on the surface are things like music, art, customs, heroes and holidays kind of thing. Deep culture goes much more expansively across life experiences and includes everything from etiquette to gender roles to attitudes about social status to notions about modesty to how people think, thought processes about information. to assumptions. And so values, norms, beliefs, worldviews, all of it has cultural connections. And I've created a tool for you that you may want to use in the final assignment that that draws your attention to this multiplicity of areas of culture. And I just wanted to introduce that to you as a way to say, as I'm looking at, and your assignment, the final assignment is on something called the aggression replacement therapy, ART, is to look at that intervention as you're reading the materials. Think about whether there are assumptions being made about these elements that have really strong cultural leanings and cultural contexts. And so if you've got an intervention that's based on a dominant culture model, and you are a non-dominant identified service user, then there's a fairly high likelihood that that intervention is going to be culturally inappropriate. And the question then is, what could you do to change the intervention, to modify it, to make it culturally relevant? How could you integrate a different understanding of, for example, gender roles, or of the notion of self and individualism? Could you morph the program to be more inclusive, or to be customized to work with a specific population in ways that didn't infringe on the identity and culture of participants? So that's the bigger challenge in this work. Part of doing evaluation is as you as evaluator needing to, at the beginning, know yourself. You need to know your own culture, and that needs to be explicit, so it needs to not be implicit. So you've got to get explicit about knowing yourself and knowing your biases. Biases are really about a suggested internalized belief that your way of being and doing is better than that of others. So that's sort of how we're acculturated to believe, especially in dominant culture. And so if you hold a dominant culture, you need to be aware of this. If you hold a non-dominant identity, you also need to be aware of your biases in working because you will also often be working cross-culturally. And so it's really key to understand the fullness of your own culture and your own biases. You also need to understand the cultural identity of those you serve, those whose program you're evaluating. You need at least to understand values, communication styles, something about the community's strengths and challenges, and their expectations of you as an evaluator. And at most, you want to understand many elements of the iceberg and not just one or two, or not just the surface ones. You also want to begin to explore what happens when different cultures intersect. And so in many cases, you will be evaluating a program for whom there are minority identified service users. And so you'll be wanting to understand their experiences, and you need to begin to understand how privilege imprints on programs. So how does dominant culture imprint? What is dominant? What's obscured, invalidated, or rendered invisible? So your duty as a equity infused community organizational practitioner is to start to notice these things and ideally give some voice to them in the course of an evaluation. You're also wanting to build on cultural capital. How can you bring the community's strengths and sub-communities in the organization into the foreground in ways that become an asset that's valued across the spectrum? How do you bridge differences? How do you remedy infractions? And you're going to have some work on this in the final assignment. You're also going to be, as a practitioner doing evaluation, you're going to be wanting to avoid missteps that signal exclusion, imperialism, trespass. And trespass in this case is really about the absence of respect for culture and identity. Again, you'll be digging into this more fully in the final assignment. And in the next class when we focus on evidence-based practices. So you're going to be trying to notice and trying to avoid these missteps, anticipating them at the beginning, and working in a more appreciative, respectful way from start to finish. Hope that helps by way of a sort of orientation to self in evaluation. We're ultimately aiming for evaluations to be truthful, accurate, affirming, and have actionable results, have useful products that will help meet the needs of the community doing the evaluation work. And finally, concrete concluding advice before you move into your readings on program evaluation more expansively. You want to have a purpose when you start the work. Ideally, that goes beyond the funder's agenda. You want to have it credible internally. You want people to be able to turn to this evaluation and say, yeah, that reflects us. Yes, that is our experience. You want to plan for it in a forethought-oriented way. Ideally, it starts when the program's implemented. And ideally, you would agree that acceptable evidence standards are going to be upheld at the end. So if you say going in, a pre and a post survey is our best effort to capture client change. For example, you'd want to say what that survey is going to look like. You want to have been collecting it throughout so that you've got the data at the end. You're also wanting to recognize that program evaluations are relationally based. So you're going to be wanting to take time to demonstrate your trustworthiness, to learn about relational styles, to build an understanding of those who you're working with. And you're also wanting to understand the life experiences of the community. Ideally, the evaluator is part of the community being served. However, we often work cross-culturally in that kind of context, but ideally it's not a big heavy lift to understand. So ideally we use community members to evaluate programs, and the shared identity helps promote entry, understanding, relationship, an appreciation of culture. Missteps get limited in that context. So that's a considerable asset to program evaluation. You also, so that's on the personnel side of it, you also want to involve community stakeholders and would have some kind of advisory board or steering committee on the project. And that the community is involved not just in sort of giving advice when you want them to give advice, but they get involved in the full range from planning, implementing, analyzing, meaning making, meaning in some interpretation of the analytic findings, and dissemination. So it's not just when you want them, but that they have real roles in shaping the work. You also, in a standard way, want to make sure you disaggregate your findings to look at how different communities benefit or don't benefit from the intervention. You also, we're going to talk about this a little later, you also want to capture not just the norms of what most people experience, but also the outliers, and hear those for whom it didn't work. And there are things you can do in order to collect that information, such as focusing on issues of language, education, ancestry, origin, employment. So ask about that, and then also in the quantitative data, you're going to be wanting to be able to disaggregate by those types of things. You might also be focusing on LGBTQ status and see if folks who are straight have a different experience in the service than folks who are LGBTQ, for example, or those with disabilities. So you're wanting to make sure that you can disaggregate ways that you think are important learnings for the organization. You want to emphasize the voice of your participants, have some kind of qualitative work. So you want mixed methods research, a combination of quantitative and qualitative, and gather stories and chronicles and poetry and parables, whatever it is, to hear and collect their insights. You want to embrace an approach to evaluation that is inclusive, affirming, encouraging, empowering. Really important. 2 more points to go. Do member checking frequently. You often will be gaining their insights about their experiences. And so as you collect those stories and make sense of them and begin to write them up, or begin to write up survey data, you want to go back to the community and say, in the ideal world, you've got time for this, go back and say, does this make sense? Have I captured your insights effectively? And having their endorsement gives you a much firmer ground for moving ahead with the evaluation. And final point is to pay ultra close attention to any risks embedded in the evaluation report. So for example, you may end up saying, for example, I'll generate one here that's Portland State University has been thinking about, there are parts of the university they're thinking about making a practicum, making a volunteering community engagement as part of a requirement for graduating. Seen it as being a real great opportunity for students to get experience in the labor market in some kind of business or service before they graduate. Value added for positioning them well for employment afterwards. Well, let's say we do research and we hear from people about how important this is and how it will be of benefit to them and how they might use it. Well, there's a risk there in that perhaps in the course of that data collection, nobody actually heard from low-income folk that this is actually going to add an extra credit hour and it's going to be costly, and that actually might delay graduation or increase the likelihood that students don't graduate. Or maybe it's going to be a movement that's going to be really opposed by a minor portion of the community, but nobody really stopped to think down the road around what the consequences might be of this work. And so just that's a minor example. But think about what's the potential for any kind of results having a negative consequence for the organization, and tread really, and the community especially, and tread really carefully in that work. So that's it. Whoops. Take care. Bye-bye.